Good afternoon, everyone. So we started this really at lunch during the keynote, really started the transition to the mini summit on workforce, and really looking forward to this afternoon. So let me introduce myself. I'm Andrew Bond. I'm the Vice President of Planning at Electric Boat, and I'll be your moderator for the afternoon. I am a career shipbuilder and have spent the vast majority of my career looking at workforce issues, and that starts with the predicting retirement of the baby boomers all the way up to the challenges that we're here to talk about this afternoon. So really excited to be with you. I think this afternoon we have the opportunity to really engage in a deep conversation, and we've got a fantastic group of panelists, and I'd ask you to I've talked to all the panelists in Reunited. We really want this to be a conversation. So after the remarks, I really encourage you to go to the mics as we've been doing all morning, and come forward with your questions and comments, because I think we're all agreed that workforce is what drives all of our businesses, and is something that is worthy of our time and our conversation today, as we talk about this challenge and opportunity at the same time. So it's my distinct pleasure this afternoon to invite to the dais both the senior senator from Rhode Island, Senator Jack Reed, who really needs no introduction in Rhode Island as not only our senior senator, but also the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and also to the stage Mr. Chris Abelheim, who is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Governor McKee, who unfortunately can't be with us this afternoon, but I invite you both to formally start us off.
Well, thank you very much, Andy, and it is a pleasure to be here. I'm very proud to welcome our guests to today's summit on shipbuilding, and let me thank the White House National Economic Council and the DoD Office of Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment, and Molly McGee of SENEDIA. Of course, we have to thank Molly. That's derogatory anytime you speak at SENEDIA. You've made a great contribution to this serious debate about the future of the Navy and the future of the nation. I also want to recognize Secretary Rosenblum. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for all the work you're doing. Admiral Papano, thank you very much for your presence here, too. Appreciate it. And I know representing the Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment Program is Adele Ratcliffe. Thank you, Adele. Thank you very much. She, by the way, is in charge of the money that we get for the industrial base, so I just bring a bag over to her and I give it to her and she takes care of it. She's terrific, so she's doing a good job. And then from Electric Boat, Sean Coyne and Ray Steen, thank you. I know the panel is going to be absolutely superb. We've got a good story to tell about the Department of Labor and the Department of Defense, together with the skills-based curriculum developed by industry and academia. They've created a model for workforce development that can strengthen our industrial base and our national security. In fact, it's a model that must and should be emulated by other sectors of the defense industry. In fact, recently, before the Armed Services Committee, the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment, Bill LaPlante, extolled the Submarine Workforce Development Program and said that such a program is needed for every sector of the department. So I want to commend those who have been important in this success. Thank you so much. We all recognize the importance of our submarine fleet to the nation. The Admiral and I were talking about how lucky we are because we get to sustain, promote, encourage, and cheer on something that everyone recognizes is absolutely critical to our national security. Both our attack submarine fleet and our ballistic submarine fleet. It is essential. And here in Rhode Island, of course, along with our neighbors in Connecticut and across New England, we've developed a long-term sustainable pipeline of workforce development initiatives to recruit, train, and hire the people we need to bring into these critical jobs to build submarines. But still, we can do more because the demand is increasing dramatically. We want to continue to build 2 attack submarines a year. We're starting on the Columbia, And when we finish that on time and on budget, we will get the next ship in line. So this is something that's absolutely essential for us. And we also understand that these jobs are filled by people who are not just punching a clock. The men and women who work at Electric Boat, all the subsidiaries, everybody understands that ultimately this is about giving the young men and women who takes these ships into harm's way the best they need for themselves and for the nation. And that goes beyond just doing a job. And I thank them, and I thank all of you who are doing that very, very much. Now, I look forward to work with you, and I wish you well. This has been a great experience over the last couple of days for me, and I hope it has been for you, too. And now, the governor, as you know, has been a little bit under the weather, but he's coming out of it now and unfurling his sails. I get nautical when I'm here in Newport. I'm the only West Point graduate that loves submarines, Admiral. I have to tell you that. I'm the only one. So, but in his place is Pastor Chris, an old friend, and one of his chief advisors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. And Governor McKee has always told us whenever we see Senator Reid, we should say, thank you, Senator Reid. Thank you, Senator Reid. Because the senator has been such a blessing to Rhode Island and championed the cause of Rhode Island at the United States Senate. And so the governor is very much appreciative of the work that our congressional delegation is doing, and especially Senator Reid. I would observe all protocols. I think the senator has mentioned some names, and I would not want to rehearse that at this time. I'm Chris Abelime, and I'm Deputy Chief of Staff to Governor McKee, who is not able to be here, as stated earlier on by the senator. And part of my role at the governor's office is to manage the governor's cybersecurity portfolio and his governor's workforce board. And those two are relevant to this summit today. And firstly, also to thank everybody for being here on his behalf and for choosing Newport for this summit. And for those who are outside of Rhode Island, for coming to our beautiful state of Rhode Island. If you're ever thinking about moving from your state, Rhode Island is ready for you. So you're always welcome to our Rhode Island. And the work that is going on in this space is vital not only to our state, but also to our country. And Rhode Island is one of the hubs, if not the hub, where a lot of this technology is being developed and deployed. And so, even though we're a small state, we have a big heart. And our 400-mile of coastal line is an asset to our state. And every company that is here, especially in the defense industry, contributes to our state and the development of our state. And under the leadership of Governor Dan McKee, Rhode Island continues to lead the nation in many indices. In vaccination, we're first in the nation. In economic recovery, we're second in the nation. In renewable energy, we're first in the nation to sign 100% renewable standard for year 2035. And recently, the governor championed a bill to produce 1,000 megawatt of offshore wind energy into Rhode Island, enough to power between 350,000 houses and 500,000 houses here in Rhode Island. And so these are bold actions that the governor has taken. And a lot of investment also in our workforce development. And in his State of the State address, the governor mentioned that the work and the job of the future is no longer the job of the future, they are the job of today. And the jobs that is represented here today, they are the job of today. The job in our defense industry, the job in our cybersecurity industry, they are the job of today. So no longer do we look at a future that is yet to come, but we're looking at today. And that's why the governor is so vested in our workforce development, that Rhode Island is not just going to be a consumer of this product, but a producer of these products. And so that our companies that are coming here have a space in our Rhode Island to thrive, and the support that they need from the governor's office will be given. So that Rhode Island continue to lead in innovation, from biotechnology to defense technology. And so on behalf of the governor, I want to thank you all for inviting him to be part of this and for choosing to have this summit here in Newport. And if you do need to reach out to the governor's office, again, Chris Abelime, or popularly known as Pastor Chris, because I also pastor a church. And you can reach out to us, and we'll be willing to connect with you and partner with you on any issue of interest or mutual interest to both the governor's office and the business that you do. So enjoy your stay in our beautiful state, and thank you so very much for the invitation.
So Chris, I'd like to, this is a SENEDIA Challenge Coin. Thanks for your participation today and hosting this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. I'd now invite our next panelist to come up, please. So as they're making their way to the dais, I'd like to introduce Ms. Celeste Drake, who is the Deputy Director for of the National Economic Council, the Made in America Director of the Office of Management and Budget. And I would also draw your attention to her extensive biography on page 16 of your handout, as I wouldn't do it justice here reading it to you. And similarly, I'd like to introduce Mr. Manny Lamarre from the Department of Labor, who's a Senior Advisor for Employment and Training Administration, and I'd also direct your attention to his biography in the leaflet. So, Ms. Celeste, Ms. Drake, would you like to start us off?
Would you like to?
It's up to you.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Manny's going to start.
Fair enough.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll get started. So thank you. It's a pleasure being here on behalf of the Department of Labor's Employment and Training Administration. Again, my name is Manny Lamarre. I'm a senior advisor there. So just really quickly, and I was able to hear some of the earlier conversations and the sessions earlier today, and I'm going to prioritize kind of three themes. From the Department of Labor, the administration, as we think about workforce. Now, within those themes, I'll provide some concrete examples of programs and strategies that's important to think about. But let's take a step back. The mission of the Department of Labor is really around providing high-quality job training, employment, income maintenance, and labor market information to improve the efficient functioning of the labor market. Now, as we think about, and we've come out of the pandemic, three key themes have come to mind, and that connects to this conversation here for the shipbuilding workforce, and some lessons learned that I think can apply for these conversations today and beyond. The first one here is around equity. And why am I starting with equity? From the start of the administration, there's been a focus and an intentionality around equity in terms of how do we build a more efficient function of the labor market? How do we include individuals that's been left out of the labor market? I think equity here plays a key part when we think about the shipbuilding workforce, particularly. I was looking at some data, and approximately, some of the data from BLS showed about 200,000 direct in the shipbuilding workforce. About 15% of that were women, and about 30% of that are African American and Hispanic. The reason why I highlight that is I've heard kind of conversations either directly or indirectly through this session around how do we build a stronger labor market workforce and fill those job openings, quite frankly, that I've heard different references. And I think of this quote one of my colleagues at the Department of Labor often says, and he gives an analogy of when he gets up in the morning and he's looking for his keys, and his wife always asks him two questions: what are you looking for, and where have you looked? And the reason why I think this kind of applies here, is as you think about building your workforce, what are you looking for, and where have you looked? And some programs that I'll highlight within the Department of Labor that maybe you're aware of, maybe you're not aware of, that's important to think about. For example, Job Corps. Job Corps is actually the only direct service program within the Department of Labor. We have 121 sites in every single state, including Puerto Rico and DC. But Job Corps provides young adults 16 to 24 opportunities to get training. It's a residential program where they receive training. And the Job Corps students are really diverse, strong and diverse students. Now, that's an example of a program that, as we're thinking about you're building your workforce, to think of. In the shipbuilding workforce, another statistic that I saw was in the 16 and 19, about 2,000 individuals are 16 and 19, and about 14,000 are between 20 to 24. I think the obvious kind of next step is to build a strong workforce. You have to start them young. I remember a few years back when I was working at the governor's office at the state level, we did a survey of young adults, and I would manage the relationship between the industry, labor, and then sat on the state workforce board as well. And I remember one student said, "How we could only be what we can see." And so the reason why I say that is, and I think we would implore kind of like in terms of this engagement, is create opportunities for young people to enter and be exposed to your workforce and to your industry. Otherwise, by the time they're, like older, they've already made up their mind. They're either unaware or they've already made up their mind. So I think that's the first kind of takeaway around equity. The second piece here I'll highlight is around job quality. This here has been an intentional focus within the Department of Labor across the administration. We know that as we came out of the pandemic, we often hear the conversation about, oh, there's a labor shortage. And at least from our perspective, the discussion is a bit more nuanced than that. And I think the nuanced part that we often want to highlight is that if you actually look at the data of the individuals that's been leaving the workforce, they're often in jobs that are not high quality jobs, quite frankly. So they're often leaving for like $1 or $2 extra. And so here is the important piece around job quality that we think is important to keep in mind as we're engaged. And this is what leads to number 3, partnerships. So equity, job quality, and the third one is partnerships. And here I'll highlight some concrete example of some partnerships that we think is important to highlight. But here, when we think about partnerships within the Department of Labor, we're often thinking about the partnership between federal, state, and local government. But we really want to, in terms of operationalizing our programs, it's labor management partnership, working with industry, working with labor, and working with the publicly funded workforce systems, and working with community-based organizations to operationalize some of these strategies. And so what we see here is in partnership is the way we've been able to scale to create opportunities is through partnerships. We can't do it alone, quite frankly. 2 examples of some programs and partnerships that we want to highlight is one is specifically with the Department of Defense, the U.S. MAP program. Department of Labor has really enjoyed our partnership with the Department of Defense U.S. MAP program. It's actually the largest public or private registered apprenticeship program in the country. We have approximately 100,000 apprentices going on every year. And that partnership really provides opportunities for individuals to connect to opportunities. And so this is where, again, tying back to the whole 3 themes, when we talk about the partnership, this is where we're able to connect with veterans, individuals in rural communities, and communities that's been often either left behind or not thought about, or we don't have partnership or engagement with. So the U.S. MAP program, our registered apprenticeship program, is a key one. A second really quick example I'll highlight is our cybersecurity sprint. We recently launched a 120-day cybersecurity apprenticeship sprint. Within the Department of Labor, we oversee registered apprenticeship programs at the federal level, and registered apprenticeships, I'm sure many of you are aware of, provides high quality pathways. They're earn and learn programs. They provide high quality pathways where individuals receive mentorships, paid on day 1 on the job training, that leads to nationally recognized credentials and education as well. And so we really think registered apprenticeship as a strategy, right, is a bridge to connect, whether we're talking about underrepresented communities, young people, veterans, an opportunity to connect. And this is why within our 120-day cybersecurity sprint, one of the things that we're focusing on, one is increasing awareness of cybersecurity. I'm sure you all have heard these kind of statistics before. We have approximately 700,000 openings, and that presents a serious, a national security threat risk, to be frank, and to our economic system. So as we think about registered apprenticeships, we're really accelerating our partnerships with industry to develop registered apprenticeship programs in the cybersecurity space. We're also creating awareness for young adults, individuals to get into registered apprenticeship programs, and working directly to develop new apprenticeship programs within the cybersecurity space. Because with the registered apprenticeship program, that's really the opportunity where you could have an individual's, come with, regardless of their background, where they receive those skills. Because at the end of the day, to operationalize the things that we're talking about, you have to have a concrete training strategy. And that training strategy has to think about how you're going to recruit individuals, how they're going to receive that training, what certifications are involved. And this is why we're really big on registered apprenticeships. So I'll stop there, but I'll synthesize the 2 points that's worth kind of extracting. Is the first one, which is I started with, which is what are you looking for and where have you looked? And then the second point here is as we think about building the workforce, of the future, as you're thinking about, creating these opportunities, what partnerships, we can't do it alone. And so how are you partnering? What programs are you connecting to really operationalize some of these key challenges that we see? And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Manny. So I'm going to take what Manny talked about and zoom out a little bit, because in the, I was introduced, I wear 2 hats. I've been in the Made in America office, directing that brand new office since a year ago, April. And then as of the start of July, I'm also in the NEC wearing this labor and the economy hat. And all of this is linked. Whenever I go somewhere and speak about what the administration is doing to promote American manufacturing, guess what questions come up? How are you training the workforce? How are you going to make sure that we have the workers that we need? And when I talk about the workforce, folks are also concerned, well, what are the good jobs and how do we make sure that the 65% of Americans who don't have a college degree get access to those good jobs? And by the way, just because you have a college degree doesn't mean you have access to a good job as well. So I'm going to start with, I like to start by quoting the president, because I find a lot of what he says very inspirational, so it sort of sets the stage about where we're going. At the signing of the CHIPS and Science Act just earlier this month, he said, "In America, everything is possible. We believe that everything and anything is possible. It's part of the soul of this country." And he continued, "We can channel all of our resources. Most of all, we can channel the full talents of all of our people into a greater measure of hope and opportunity for our nation and for the world, to create good jobs, empower workers, grow the economy, not just for the wealthy, but grow it for everyone, to change the course of human health and disease, to tackle the climate crisis with innovation and jobs, to lead the world," and this is not hyperbole, "in future industries and protect our national security." I mean, isn't that why we're here today? So that's the start. I'm going to talk about a few key top-line messages, things that we've accomplished. I'm going to take a little bit of a bird walk and talk about the Made in America office just a little bit so you get some sense of how these ideas link together. I'll talk about workforce investment and give some examples of some major accomplishments and new laws we've put in place, and then I'll stop, and I think I'll be very interested in the conversation and the questions that folks have. So just as top lines, when the president took office, he inherited an economy that was shrinking by 3.4%. There were millions of folks unemployed, and experts were projecting a potential decade-long recovery, like we had the last time we were coming out of an economic crisis. Yet last year we saw the economy grow by 5.4%, the fastest since 1984. We're averaging about 500,000 jobs a month created since the president took office, and the unemployment rate now sits below 4%. And we've added 642,000 manufacturing jobs just since the president has been in office. More than 95% of prime age workers are back to work since the pandemic, and Black and Latino workers are back at higher rates than in the previous 3 economic recoveries. Under President Biden's leadership and his priority to make it in America, 2021 was the best year for manufacturing growth in 3 decades. And we just want to remember that as we're talking about this, to reflect on Manny's comments, when we're talking about what's the labor shortage, sometimes it's better to think about, is it a shortage of good, high-quality jobs? Because if we remember, in the president's words, that all work has dignity, and that as we're creating jobs, we're creating good jobs, we are investing in the future of America, and that will lead us where we want to go. So just a little bit about why is there a Made in America office, and what does it have to do with American national security, economic security, good jobs for American workers? As you know, if you've ever heard the president speak, he believes that a commitment to Made in America is sacred, and he talks about it at every opportunity. And he believes that if we can support American manufacturing through our purchasing, including the DoD's purchasing, including through federal financial assistance, through our tax policies, that what we're going to do is create a stronger, better, healthier national economy and national security. It's no small task, though. It's really a shift in how we have thought about how we're doing procurement, how we're doing federal financial assistance, what we're prioritizing. But what it's doing is trying to make sure that when we spend taxpayer dollars, we're doing that to support economic security, national security, good jobs, including union jobs. And we are doing it. The president faced a manufacturing sector that was hollowed out, that for too many years, we had sort of pulled back the reins and said this sector of the economy can figure it out on its own. And anyone who's at the DoD, and I work with the DoD quite a lot, because if you're working to try and make sure the federal government buys American, half of that purchasing is at the DoD. And I hear from a lot of folks that this is a really exciting initiative, and they really want to see more firms jump into the space and see more competition, but they've got to see that the U.S. government is really concentrated on that. So we were talking a little bit over lunch about incentives, and there were just some misaligned incentives that really took a lot of American manufacturing and pushed it offshore because we weren't working to make sure that it was here. We had investors who were chasing quick returns, short-term decision-making. We had a lot of over-concentration in our supply chains and sole sourcing. And to address all of these things that had been there for a long time, but all of a sudden became exposed during COVID, the president came in and said, we have a role to play. This is not, the economy is not the weather. We can make choices, and we will direct it. And as a result, we're investing in critical supply chains, including historic investments in critical minerals, electrical equipment, the medical supplies we need, so that we have what we need when we need it. These commitments have, for instance, catalyzed more than $700 million in private investment in the EV charging supply chain just since the start of this year. And when the president signed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, he ensured that we're making the biggest investment ever in our nation's future. These investments will increase our productivity, they will address longstanding equity issues, and they will make sure that our infrastructure is built with American products. From medicines to PPE, to batteries for electric vehicles, to offshore wind, we're catalyzing that in US manufacturing, and we're gonna need people to fill those jobs, right? And that's where the next piece comes in. How do we support that workforce? When we look at the past of what the US did to try and drive the workforce that we need, we find that some of it just sort of happened, and some of it was a true investment, and we're back to the point where we need that investment now. So if we look back to the Great Migration, it was a pivot point in economic empowerment for African Americans. Millions moved from the rural South to the Midwest for the first time to take cutting-edge manufacturing jobs. And for a long time, the employers there invested in those workers and made sure that there were pathways for upward mobility. But as the economy changed and the employers focused on the short-termism and stopped investing in workers, what we saw was an erosion of the pathways to the middle class. So it wasn't that manufacturing jobs were good just because they were manufacturing jobs. They were good because The employers and the workers together made them good jobs. Unions worked to make sure there were good pay and good benefits. And employers said, this is a workforce we want for a long time, and we're going to invest in it. And as employer-provided training eroded, the public workforce system has not kept up with the needs of workers. The U.S. invests less than 6 times what the average OECD country does in its own workforce investment. And then we wonder why we have a skills mismatch between what shipbuilders want and what the workforce is ready to provide. But when we listen to workers, we can start to address ways to improve job quality, reduce turnover, increase productivity, and do all of this in ways that benefit the employer. One way to do that is to provide pathways to the middle class through skills investments, but they have to be the skills that employers actually want and need in the places that they need them. And a lot of times there's been a real mismatch between the training that folks say, oh, go out there, there are a lot of jobs if you take this particular training. But those jobs aren't in their town, in their region, even in their state. And particularly for GDEB, we know that you need 18,000 skilled employees to build Virginia and Columbia-class submarines. Do you have those folks here where you need them? Do you have them now, right? And how do we set that up? So we know there are some things in place that are going to help that already. One is the president's commitment to registered apprenticeships. It helps reduce the friction between the hiring and the training process. It reduces turnover, it improves productivity, and it fosters diversity. It's one of the most important reasons why the president signed an executive order to promote registered apprenticeships. We also are investing in that training. In 2021, the Biden administration helped workers return to work through $438 million in workforce development grants awarded by the DOL. The funding provided opportunities for underserved individuals, and it promoted equity across training programs. Additionally, states and localities are using ARP funds to support workforce development activities. Last year, President Biden signed the executive order on registered apprenticeships. It relaunched a more diverse apprenticeship advisory council, and his FY22 budget proposed $285 million additional funds to expand registered apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs that increase access for underrepresented groups. One program I want to talk about is the Registered Apprenticeship Program for Driving Good Jobs. When we were looking at what's happening across the supply chain disruptions, we found that there's a real problem in the trucking industry. Trucking employers said we can't find truckers. When we looked at people who were driving, they said, these are not good jobs, and in many cases, they're not even jobs, meaning they're an independent owner-operator, they don't have access to sick pay, health benefits, unemployment insurance, minimum wage and overtime, all of those things. So we got the groups together, we had a convening, and more than 130 different trucking companies now provide a registered apprenticeship in trucking. So instead of somebody who's interested in trucking having to go to a private school, pay for the training, and then hope that they can get a job that will allow them to pay off perhaps the loan they took out to take out the training, they can earn while they learn. And that's a huge commitment and a real turnaround from where it was. We're now working to try and take that model and replicate it in other industries. So we're looking at the EV charging industry that I talked about, and how can we make sure there are registered apprenticeships and training in the manufacturing of this equipment, the installation of the equipment, and the maintenance of the equipment. Similarly, in healthcare, there simply are not enough home care workers and nurses to go around. So we're looking at that industry and how do we create a career pathway. Finally, I would like to mention the EDA Good Jobs Challenge. This is run by the Department of Commerce. It creates a virtuous cycle of local economic development, building intentional partnerships with strategic industries and key employers around their actual demand for talent and skills. It requires a simultaneous focus on training, upskilling, supporting local talent that's consistent with the demand of employers. So we're not training folks for jobs that don't exist. And just on August 3rd, EDA released an announcement of $500 million in Good Jobs Challenge grants. There were 32 awardees for this program, and local governments partner with employers, labor unions, community colleges, other stakeholders to make sure they're focused on local talent needs. And what we'd like to do is expand this kind of partnership so that that's happening here, that's happening anywhere that there are shipbuilding needs, that's happening anywhere where there are DoD needs, because we can get together and we can do this, but it has to be intentional and there has to be a focus on job quality. And we know that there's congressional support in a bipartisan way to invest in the workforce. So let's keep getting it done. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much to both of you. And so I'd encourage those that have questions or comments to start making your way toward the microphones on either side. I'd like to start us off with a question and really bringing together kind of thematically what both of you were saying. I'd say I probably speak on behalf of the whole room where we're excited about the return to a manufacturing economy as those of us that never left, right? And rebuilding that base. And I'd say near term, long term, it's very exciting. Near term, if anything, it places more competitive pressure on the existing labor pool. And so you talked about the quality of jobs, and I think we're all intensely proud of what we do and the quality of jobs that we provide. So I'd love your perspective on how that lays in with is there a labor shortage, right? Or where else should we be looking, and how should we be thinking about this in the context of the comments that you've made?
I can start just really quickly. In terms of the two parts to your question, one, is there a labor shortage? And then two, where else should you all be looking? So two things that stands out. The first one is, I mentioned it earlier in my points around that when we see individuals earlier from the pandemic, they were moving for, $1 or $2 differences in either or more flexibility or for various purposes. But I think what I want to emphasize around the labor shortage kind of framing, and in terms of where else should you be looking, is really just, quite frankly, just highlighting some of the DOL programs, whether or not you're aware of them. And I really, really do think, because when we look at unemployment and labor force participation rate, this is where it kind of gets like the nerdy side of your typical unemployment rate, but then there's, individuals that's been left out of the labor market that's actually not counted, right? In terms of long-term unemployment. And here, I think we have an opportunity to leverage programs to bring those people back into the labor market, into the economy. And so I had mentioned Job Corps as a program. Again, if you're not aware of Job Corps, you should. But I mentioned some others. Youth Build programs, actually, it's a pre-apprenticeship programs in communities. They're in 40 states. And Youth Build provide young adults 16 to 24 opportunities to receive job training, particularly in the sectors like that we're talking about, manufacturing, construction, and so forth. So there's already a pool and a pipeline of individuals, but I'll mention a few others really quickly. American Job Centers, if you're not partnering with your American Job Center or your state and local workforce board, there's a unique and a great opportunity to. And I'm biased because I used to sit on the state workforce board, and I used to tell companies and organizations all the time, if you're looking for workers, get engaged with your local and state workforce board, because they're the ones that's literally seeing the day-to-day, your American Job Centers, partnering and working with job seekers on a daily basis, so they can connect and create programs and leverage federal dollars, state and local dollars to create programs for individuals. So Job Corps, Youth Build, American Job Centers, state and local workforce boards, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, and as Celeste mentioned, around registered apprenticeships. So, and then the other component to that, so those are programs, but then on the people side, I saw this back, as the economy started tightening up, we see industry start talking about now individuals with formerly incarcerated. individuals with disabilities. The tighter the labor market gets, the more employers are now open to these populations. And I think, right, that we should be a bit more proactive and intentional about connecting with those populations, because there's tons of research and data that shows those and various individuals presents opportunities to really stay and work long term in the workforce when they receive the training. So I think that's another piece. So there's the program sides, but then there's the population side, whether we're talking about women, we're talking about people with formerly incarcerated or reentry populations, individuals with disability. Within the Department of Labor, we have two agencies, Women's Bureau and ODEP, which is the Office of Disability Employment program, where they actually provide support and engage with employers to support job training, and particularly for those populations. So I think that's like the lens I'm going to emphasize, which is that you've looked everywhere, but I think that you think you looked everywhere. I kind of think of the analogy, I was mentioning it earlier to someone here, is like I have a nephew, he's like 2 years old, and it's kind of like, you think you've searched, but you open another door, he opens another door, and he's like, oh, wow, I didn't, like, he wasn't aware of it. So I think the thing we want to emphasize is to really expand into the programs and the people and the partnerships that you are developing, because there are populations that are untapped that haven't been. So I would say that we haven't looked everywhere yet. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Ms. Drake, your perspective?
Sure. I would just agree with all of that 100%, and would just add a little bit there. When we talk about a labor shortage, we can think about actually a good job shortage, because all the employers are really competing for that same workforce. And how do you make sure that the workers that you want, that have the skills that you want, choose you? And if it's, if what you're looking for is someone with a bachelor's degree and 10 years experience, and they're really good with people, and they really have, strategic vision, and you're going to pay them $15 an hour with no benefits, you're going to look around and say, where are all the workers? But maybe it's really, that's not the problem. Maybe it is you're paying benefits, but maybe it's that there is a skills mismatch. And you've got to invest in those workers to help them develop the skills that you want them to have. And I think it's sort of that switch in mindset, because for a long time there were, this idea of the instant profits, the lack of investment, the shedding of the costs led to shedding of the jobs and shedding of the skills. And if we invest in our workforce because people are an investment, what you find is that the data show that people stick around, and you're actually dealing with your turnover problem because you're investing in folks and they feel valued, separate and apart from what is the pay and benefits package. And so, companies that have high road models where they have labor management partnerships, if they are working with unions in the workplace to make sure that they have good safety records, that folks have opportunities for training and can move up the career ladder, those are companies that are engaging in constant improvement and the constant pursuit of perfection, more so than the companies that are looking around waiting for the perfect worker to come to them. And I think that's what we really found during the pandemic, and some of the ways that the administration is investing in that. Again, if you look at recent legislation like the CHIPS and Science Act, the CHIPS and Science Act invests in STEM education, starting from K-12, so that folks are ready for college, but also community college, undergraduate and graduate education, and programs supporting minority-serving institutions, such as historically Black colleges and universities and Hispanic-serving institutions. The CHIPS and Science Act also gives the Department of Commerce another $10 billion with a B to create 20 geographically distributed regional technology hubs that will focus on technology development, job creation, and expanding U.S. innovation and capacity. So there are programs out there, and I will just echo what Manny said, is get involved in those programs. right? Join the local workforce investment board and make sure that you're acting, because when I was a congressional staffer and we had a hearing on workforce investment boards and what was working and what was not working, there was a whole population of folks who had lost jobs in one of the rounds of some of the manufacturing going overseas. And they went to their workforce investment board and they were told, well, you know, we looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data and there's going to be a lot of growth in hairdressing and nursing and, you know, working at restaurants. So which one of those do you want to be? And that really wasn't tied to what were the skills of the workers coming in, right? What were the needs of the local community, and what was going to provide that good quality job where somebody says, this is the next chapter of my life and I want to do that. Instead there was just a total mismatch. So if you're seeing that you don't have workers with the skills that you want, get involved and help create them.
Thank you for that perspective. So kind of continuing on that theme, and I'll ask the upcoming panel the same question with a sort of a different variation, but kind of an ongoing conversation that we've had is given that manufacturing has fallen fallow in this country, and with the resurgence is, I'll relate it through a story. I had the opportunity to tour a community college that, you know, fantastic facilities that were well aligned to, you know, our needs. And in talking with the president, he was talking about the challenges in enrollment, right? He said, we've got the facilities, but we can't get the students. And I said, kind of, you know, what's your perspective on that? He said, I have to convince the mothers, right, that manufacturing is a good job, right, and to break that myth that you must have a college degree, right, to be successful in this country. So with the leadership role that the administration is taking and the investments that you're making, how do you see at a macro level how we start to change that conversation? Because I think, you know, we view it as right now is one of the barriers to getting people to understand that they just don't yet know they want to work within our industry.
Sure. So I'll start with that one, and then you can go, Manny. So I think it's the macro level and it's the micro level. And I think when the president talks about manufacturing jobs as good jobs, and he talks about registered apprenticeships, and he shows the American public that lots of folks who don't have college degrees make really excellent livings at being a plumber and pipe fitter, being an electrician, being a sheet metal worker, all of the things that were discussed earlier. And that sometimes folks in these careers are making twice, 3 times what you might make as an elementary school teacher, where you probably have a bachelor's degree and an advanced degree. So it is sort of the showing and telling and that moral suasion. And by the way, reminding folks again that all work has dignity. You don't only have dignity if you get up in the morning and put on a tie and a jacket and make sure that the job you go to is in an air-conditioned office. But what makes those jobs good, I will just emphasize again, it's a partnership between the worker saying this is going to be a good job with good benefits and negotiating with employers who are committed to the same thing, to creating those good jobs with good benefits. And I think it's, you know, that's at sort of the macro level, but you see it happening. Manny and I were talking before, we both come out of education. We were classroom teachers at the start of our careers. And I think there was just for many, many years coming from the White House, members of both parties, it's not a partisan issue, from parents, from teachers in school, my students were told, you know, essentially you're only someone if you go to college. And that's simply not true. And it's already changing. I've been a lot of years out of the classroom, but there are a lot of schools that have this career and technical education. They have majors in high school that have nothing to do with whether or not you're going to college. They're training students for a career. Youth Build is a great example. And as students see that there are good careers and good jobs and well-paying jobs and maybe fun jobs where they get to work outdoors and work with their hands, they will see those as good opportunities. But if they only see the good jobs as those where you wear a suit and a tie, they're not going to have a conception of it as a life that they want to lead for themselves, and their parents aren't going to have a conception of it as a successful job.
Thank you for that.
That's correct, Celeste. Couldn't have said it better. If I had to synthesize from, our perspective in terms of that, to your question around that, I would say it's an awareness gap, exposure gap, and then an experience gap. And the way you bridge the three, and particularly for employers, contractors, individuals, public and private in the room, is to create opportunities for work-based learning opportunities for students. So the awareness gap, we talked about this already, which is that if you go and ask, pick out 10 young adults and ask them what is advanced manufacturing, guarantee you the majority of them will either not know what it is or describe it inaccurately. And so the same way, in the private sector, you pay to put products on the top of your shelf at eye level so people can see it, we have to invest to make sure that students are aware of that. The exposure gap is really from, if you don't have that kind of opportunity to engage within an organization, you won't know what it is. And then the experience gap is around the skill development. And this is why when we talk about pre-apprenticeships or some of these programs, we're talking about it because we know that they bridge the gap. I've had the opportunity to go to Switzerland several times and looking at their youth apprenticeship, like how they operationalize it. And when and to Celeste's point, about 15 years ago coming out of the classroom, I used to see it all the time. Students will rise to the expectation that you set for them. So if the expectation that you set for them, and you provide them the opportunities to have that experience, and you create a safe environment where they can get those skills, they will rise to that level. Like I've seen it over and over. And so I think the way we bridge that gap is to increase work-based learning opportunities. And again, to the piece, it's not just kind of cliche to say the partnership is, what partnerships do you have to work with a secondary CTE, career technical education program? There are CTE programs that actually have, as part of their program, they have advanced manufacturing as part of the curriculum, and they cannot find a way to place the students. So if they're in your communities, you should be partnering with those institutions to create that opportunity, because again, by the time individuals in their mid to late 20s, they've already made up their minds. Something dramatic has to happen for them to kind of pivot or redirect. And so to just increase that exposure, awareness, and experience gap. So increase work-based learning opportunities.
Thank you. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to the floor. We have a question over here.
Yeah, hi, Colin McLennan from Quantic Evans, and I appreciate the shipbuilding workforce. I participated in that program, and I know they've done a lot of great things. I hear you talking about the apprentice programs, and I've been recently talking to several folks in the trades groups, whether it's electrical or plumbing or various, and really can't find workers to fill their demand. And a lot of that, I've been told, is because there's constraints on the number of apprentices they can have per licensed electrician or per licensed plumber, and they're having a hard enough time finding licensed ones, let alone apprentices to help accomplish the work they have. I don't know if there's any thoughts around kind of removing that damper to the workforce, or ways to centralize that, or to remove those barriers. But it certainly seems to be a constraint to adding more people into those trades. So.
I'll quickly jump in. I used to oversee the State Apprenticeship Agency, and I know I've heard some of those concerns before. I'll highlight a couple things. And actually, one of them, Celeste, you had mentioned it around the trucking challenge, is in terms of what the administration has been doing to expand, modernize, diversify the registered apprenticeship ecosystem. And the trucking challenge, one of the things we've heard is that, it's too bureaucratic to develop an apprenticeship program. That's, one thing I think to your comment. And we actually were able to show that we were able to create registered apprenticeship programs as part of the trucking challenge within 48 hours when employers add to a program. So I would say that, if that's concerned, have them reach out to us so we could connect with them and help develop an apprenticeship program. Second thing, so this is the example of the trucking challenge. When Celeste mentioned we created over 100 apprenticeship programs within 90 days, that was literally an example of, one, partnerships. So we partnered with other federal agencies, but then two, to actually prove and show that you actually can do this. And so we have concrete examples. The second thing I think I hear you from your comment is around the ratios, and in terms of like, not to get too technical on it, but really part of that is around safety concerns. And so when we think about developing a registered apprenticeship program, depending on the occupations, right? So you actually can't cast them in a broad nest because it actually varies. Depending on the type of occupations, we do think it's important to have some level of ratio. And what he's referring to is a journey person, essentially like a mentoring, how many individuals you want to mentor, like the apprentice. And for some occupations, there are specific ratios as it relates to the amount of apprentice to a journey person, which is a licensed, individual. Some of that, depending on the occupation, is quite frankly just around safety, because we want to ensure, and programs, quite frankly, want to ensure that as an individual is developing an apprenticeship program, that individual actually have that access to that person, that mentor, and have that in-depth experience to actually supervise them, as opposed to going back to, not to use the classroom analogy again, I went from teaching, middle school math, at one point having, 40 students in a classroom. So I think that it's a bit nuanced. It depends on the occupations, quite frankly. So.
Thank you. We have a question over here.
There you go. He taught me how to do it, so. Good afternoon. My name's Paul Lavoie, and I'm the Chief Manufacturing Officer for the state of Connecticut. And I work for Governor Ned Lamont. In Connecticut, we have a numbers problem, and we all know, how important shipbuilding is to Connecticut and how important Groton Sub Base is and Electric Boat as well. But we have 110,000 people, 110,000 job openings in Connecticut across our entire ecosystem, and we have 75,000 people on unemployment. So if we took everybody off of unemployment, so that to us is really it's not a metric that we use. And Manny, you had brought this up. Our metric is the labor participation rate. How do we get more people working? Because we don't have enough people. So what we're focusing on, and I'd like to know if there's a federal response to this as well. So we look at barriers to entry to the workforce, like childcare and affordable childcare. Transportation. In Connecticut, all of our manufacturing moved to the suburbs, but yet all of our workforce that we want to provide a pathway to a middle-class lifestyle lives in our cities. So how do we get them from our cities to our suburbs? And we're looking at some innovative ways to be able to do that as well. And then we're also looking at community building, because we know that the 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom ranch with the white picket fence and the 2 cars in the garage might have been our parents' dream, and it might have been my dream, but it's not my kids' dream. They want to have communities where they can live and they can play, ideally work, but in manufacturing we're not in the center city, but where they can be able to live and play. So we're putting a very large focus on building really strong communities that will attract people to Connecticut. Is there a federal response on barriers to entry, to the labor participation rate, and how we can continue to get people back into the workforce by eliminating those barriers?
I have 2 things to that. One, I promise we did not pay him to make that comment, because it ties in really well, actually, to a couple things that we wanted to highlight. One is around the administration's investments around workforce. So when I mentioned the American Job Centers, it's because of the supportive services elements. So where there's the over $300 million the administration has put around registered apprenticeships, the connection and when we put out those investments, we've intentionally highlighted supportive services. So again, if you're not aware, if you connect with an American Job Center, local workforce board, and when our investment, we intentionally call it out, those things support childcare, transportation, work clothing, education. And so that's actually one of the investment that we've been increasing. And you'll see actually our work with the other agencies, whether with commerce, transportation, you'll see those elements in those investments when they refer to supportive services. And that's through, the first thing. The second thing that we're doing is around skills-based hiring. And I think that when you bring up the barriers to entry, some of those are actually arbitrary barriers. And I think Celeste, when you had mentioned this earlier as well, which is that we often see when we work with the industry or employers sometimes, you might have, the default is a bachelor's, but really does the job actually require to have a bachelor's? And oftentimes when we disaggregate kind of the data in the conversation, it sometimes don't require that. It's just like the default. And so this is where, whether we're looking at licensing, occupational licensing, and those are often at the state level in terms of licensing requirements, but also around skills-based hiring. Like, what is your job description? Does it actually require you to have those? And those are, quite frankly, sometimes just arbitrary. So I think I would kind of turn that question back around to say, depending on the job, analyze it, to look at what is required and what is required within the first 90 days or 120 days. Because, the first day, if someone could meet every single aspect of it, every aspect of their job, then, what's the opportunity? The next thing they're going to think about is, what's my next opportunity for career advancement? So think about the skills-based hiring and the supportive services element. And this is where the partnership come in with the workforce boards, because they have the funding to do it.
So all I would add to that is you've made the point that when the president says there's physical infrastructure and there's human infrastructure, and you really need both to put America back to work in a really robust way. So what we saw with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, a real focus on the physical infrastructure. And we think, by the time these investments are made, you will see an improvement in folks' ability to get to work, because there's more public transit, commute times are slower. But what about that human infrastructure? And we've all heard of the sandwich generation now, and we're all, quite aware that there's a deficit in affordable childcare. And when I said the U.S. is behind other advanced economies in terms of our investment in workforce training, we're also behind other advanced economies in providing supportive services for mothers and for fathers to have an affordable place to put your children while you're at work. But it's also the parents. And a lot of times folks are caring for aging parents who need care when you're in the workplace. And when we don't have a trained, reliable workforce who can provide that home care, then folks may not be able to work. They have to stay home. They're not in the workforce because they're providing that care. You might be reducing the choices of people with disabilities, because then they have to go to a more institutionalized setting because they can't find that trained and careful workforce so they can stay in the home. So there are a lot of supports, and the administration is working on filling those as it can. But the more that we can all see that it really needs to be a holistic thing. It's not workers who have problems who need help with childcare and parental care. It's workers who have problems affording that. And if we provide that to all of us, we're gonna have that really robust workforce. And you're gonna find at all of the places that you're talking about, by providing those supports or helping folks access them or supporting the provision of that in your community, in your state, in the nation, you'll find better people in the workplace because you've just added folks to the workforce.
Thank you. Other questions from the floor? While you're thinking of your next question, so you've talked about a lot of the different programs, right? And so if I'm from a small business in the audience today, right, where do I start, right? There's a lot of opportunity out there, but how do I navigate the system, right? SENEDIA offers some fantastic resources, but outside of that, I think pointing toward the local job centers is a great start. But for some of these other programs and actions, where do you start?
Yeah, I really think it just depends on what the end goal is, right? What the end goal is. There's we have resources on our website. We have both investment opportunities, whether that's grants. We have a navigator in terms of registered apprenticeships, if you want to start a registered apprenticeship. If you want to connect with the local workforce board, there's a search button where you could find that. Or if you want to connect with the staff directly, you can reach out to our department directly. And so I really do think it's about, what are you looking for, starting off with that. And then we can definitely direct you to, depending on what you're looking for, to opportunities.
Great, thank you. Do you have anything to add there?
Just that it may not, your first stop, particularly if you're a small business, may not be the federal government. There's a lot of resources there, but if you reach out locally, usually the folks at the local level will know exactly what you're looking for, and they will connect you to the state and the federal programs that you need. And also your elected officials, they want to help you out. So sometimes if you don't know exactly where to start, if you can describe what you're trying to reach, Senator Reid's office or Representative Lanchovin's office or whoever is your local office, they want to help. So asking them for help, they will connect you with the exact program, get you to the right people, help you get your question answered.
Great. Thank you both for that. Over here.
Good afternoon. Brenda Burdick with General Dynamics Mission Systems. My question is regarding the Job Corps and Youth Build, which I think are awesome programs, but they are very specific in age and end at 24. And I think that there are a lot of 25, 26, 28, 30-year-olds that are underemployed. And are there any programs for those individuals?
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I mean, many of our programs, quite frankly, are actually for adults. So I emphasize those programs for the youth side since it's often underemphasized. But whether you're talking about the dislocated worker grants, so I'd highlight a few just really quickly. And most of actually our programs will support adults but dislocated worker grants would be the first one to think about. A second one to think about is incumbent worker training. And so incumbent worker training, what that does is that, let's say Manny is in a job and we want to upgrade or upskill. That's another opportunity, but we also have quite a few other resources. But yes, the short answer is yes. Dislocated worker grants, incumbent worker training programs. Of course, the registered apprenticeship. The majority is actually adults in those programs as well. But of course, there's other specific kind of sector-based strategies. This is one other thing I'll just highlight, and this is to your point. This is really important that. At the federal level, like one of my learnings was before I was at the state level and looking at the federal level, but now I see kind of like the connection between federal, state, and local. You can go to your region. At the end of the day, a lot of things happen at the local and regional level, so you can leverage sector-based strategies or sector strategies. And sector strategies are where you're getting a group of companies together, you're bringing labor within your region together, you're bringing the economic development workforce boards together to literally develop a workforce training program specific for a group of companies. And you can do that. And again, it goes back to like our earlier point around partnerships. So yes, and we could, I could, email you or connect with you quite a few others, but yes, there are.
And I would just add to that, one thing that the president has talked about a lot is called the Hollings Manufacturing Extension Partnership. That's out of the Department of Commerce and NIST. And one of the things that they do is you can go to them as a manufacturer and say, we want to go from the kind of manufacturing that we're doing to advanced manufacturing, or we've seen these opportunities perhaps through federal procurement solicitations or other things, and we don't know how to do that, and we think maybe we can get into that space. Working with MEP, they can not only help you create a plan to like what's the technology and the capital investment that you need, but how do you get your workers upskilled and trained for what you need to do? So there are a lot of avenues, and MEP is a great one, and I try and talk about it all the time because the president put it right into his Made in America executive order that he wants all of the agencies across the federal government to work with MEP because MEP has those direct connections to manufacturers, including small business manufacturers in every single state. So the more that we are working with MEP, the more that we're lifting up small businesses across the country, which means lifting up their workers.
Great. Last question over here.
Hi, Seth Eisenberg from Department of Defense, Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation. This question is for Ms. Drake. Is there anything further that you think Department of Defense, industry, and unions can do collaboratively to assist with workforce issues and tackle those? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that, one of the things is just sort of getting our heads around the fact that unions can be a really positive force in the workplace. Many of us in this room, we're living in a time where about 10% of the workforce is unionized and only about 6% of the private sector workforce is unionized. So we may not have ever worked in a unionized workplace or had our parents or had our good friends too. And we have a lot of assumptions about what unions are and aren't, and that somehow they are not associated with efficiency. They're not associated with productivity. They're not associated with good things. And I think for the workplaces that have them, what they find is that often the data show you've got safer workplaces, you've got less worker turnover, you've got workers who feel empowered to speak up, to say, you know, I am vested in the success of this workplace, and I'm going to provide this suggestion, or I'm going to make sure that we're doing this right. And so I think it's just the openness to have that conversation, and we really hope that through the president, you know, saying repeatedly he's the most pro-labor president in history, that we will find employers, including the DoD and all the companies that the DoD works with, might take a look and see, how can I work with unions in a positive way, maybe through cooperating through a registered apprenticeship program, for, you know, even before you talk about, you know, making sure that workers have an opportunity to negotiate contracts, but providing that free and fair opportunity to organize, and seeing what unions have to offer, and seeing the positive aspects on productivity and longevity and those things. We think that's a great place to start.
Great. Well, our time is about up, so I thank you very much to both of you for giving us a fantastic view of the national landscape and the exciting things on the horizon. So thank you very much for joining us today. And as a token of our appreciation, we have a SENEDIA challenge coin for each of you.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, and so now we will take a 10-minute break, strict 10 minutes, please, as we swap over and move on to our next panel.